Going on the attack over Japan's plans to change its policy on defence. Protesters fight back against a controversial bill allowing a greater role for the military. A fundamental change to Japan's pacifist stance or a necessary measure to keep the country safe. This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finnegan. Now, it's something that's defined Japan for almost 70 years, a pacifist constitution drawn up after the Second World War, stating that it can only use its military to defend itself if facing a direct attack. But Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has been pressing to expand the role of the military in the face of what he's called an increasing security challenge. Japan's lower house of parliament has now pushed through a contentious bill dropping a ban on collective self-defense. That's fighting to defend a friendly country. Under the legislation, Japan's self-defense forces would be allowed to defend allies that come under attack. That could see troops sent abroad to fight. Limits on international peacekeeping operations could be relaxed, and Japan could play a more robust role off its shores, for example, monitoring China's activity in disputed areas of the South China Sea. Now, opponents say that it could drag Japan into US-led conflicts around the world and violate the pacifist constitution. We'll get the thoughts of our guests in just a moment. First, though, we'll hear from Al Jazeera correspondent Harry Fawcett.
For a second day running, protesters descended on Japan's parliament, the Diet, to voice their opposition to what was happening inside. A majority of Japanese voters are against Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's security legislation, which will loosen the restrictions on how the country can use its military, but which legal experts have called unconstitutional.
I'm a teacher and I don't want to send my students or my own child to war. I'm here to oppose the bills.
The government is not listening to the voice of the public, not even to the academics. They only listen to what's convenient to them.
For a second day running, Abe's ruling coalition, with its two-thirds majority, was demonstrating its power. The controversial bills had been forced through to a full vote in the lower house. Their passage, such a formality, that the opposition walked out before the vote. For the Prime Minister, this is another step towards what he calls normalising Japan's post-war status in a neighbourhood changed by China's rise.
The security situation surrounding Japan is increasingly severe. These bills are necessary to protect Japanese people's lives and prevent a war before it breaks out.
Japan's cabinet reinterpreted the pacifist constitution a year ago, allowing for so-called collective self-defense, coming to the aid of an ally under attack. But this legislation is needed before that can happen. It's also designed to make it easier for Japanese troops to coordinate with their US counterparts in Asia and to enable their deployment in a logistics role to a conflict far from home. For Shinzo Abe, this is about making good on a commitment given to Japan's main ally, the United States. It's also about fulfilling his long-held ambition to give Japan a more muscular presence in the world. At home, though, with mounting opposition to both the content of the bills and the methods by which they're being forced through, he's already paying a political price. Harry Fawcett, Al Jazeera.
All right, let's bring in our first guest for this Inside Story. Joining us from Tokyo is Tomohiko Taniguchi, who's a special advisor to Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's cabinet and a professor at Keio University. Thank you for being with us, sir. Help us understand the Prime Minister's mindset here. Why is he convinced that this constitutional reinterpretation to allow collective self-defense is so necessary for Japan right now?
Firstly, it's been long overdue. When the Japanese ground troops were dispatched over to Iraq, strictly for humanitarian purposes after the Iraqi war, those troops had to operate under the protection provided by the Australians, the Dutch and the British forces. Nonetheless, they were not allowed to help rescue those security providers, if you like, of the Brits and the Dutch and the Australians in case of a contingency or emergency. And among the 190 plus countries in the world, Japan has been the only exception, if you like, in that it's been prohibited its armed forces from getting engaged in any sort of collective actions. Shinzo Abe has viewed this as something very much troubling, because under the circumstances where the alliance structure that Japan has had, at the center of which, of course, you have the United States, is getting more like a networked alliance. And Japan, if it wants to be a net provider of security, it's been absolutely necessary for it to have this right to exercising collective self-defense.
But what about those who argue, though, that it would merely drag Japan into conflicts that are none of its making, that it has no right to be involved with in the first place?
You've got to show your capabilities for deterrence. And if you can show your capacities to do that, the situation that surrounds Japan is going to be safer, is going to be more predictable, is going to be more, let's say, law-abiding.
What about those who would argue that this is unconstitutional?
Whether this is unconstitutional or constitutional is something that constitutional scholars can debate. The fact of the matter is, nothing has been changed in Japan's constitution, including its clause to renounce war as a means to pursue your national interest. And that's going to remain so. And that means that the Japanese armed forces cannot get engaged in offensive actions before it has been attacked. And that definition has been widened slightly to include your close ally, because when your close ally has been under attack, the current interpretation of the Constitution has enabled Japan not to get engaged in collective actions.
But there are those who would argue that what the Prime Minister really wants is to rewrite the Constitution, that in fact this is just the tip of the iceberg, that the Prime Minister does not like the concept that the powers of his government should be restricted by the Constitution. How would he argue that point?
The Japanese Constitution stipulates, in order for any single clause to be revised, it takes 2/3 majorities in both houses, and it's got to be endorsed by the majority of the voters. So you've got a two-staged structure, one at the parliament, another on the national referendum, a national level in terms of the national referendum. So he may want to change the constitution. Then he must propose the ideas to the parliament, and those ideas must be endorsed by 2/3 majorities in both houses.
Okay, so at the moment we have a situation where he can't change the Constitution, so he is, well, he describes it as reinterpreting it. In fact, he's ignoring it, isn't he?
Well, it's a matter of definition that whichever language you might want to use. But so long as the Japanese Constitution remains as is, Japanese government, under whoever administration, must operate strictly under those constitutional boundaries.
Really good to talk to you, sir. Many thanks indeed. I really appreciate your time. All right, well, let's bring in the rest of our guests for today's Inside Story. Joining us from Tokyo, Michael Penn, president of the Shingetsu News Agency. From Beijing, we're joined by Yanmei Shi, who's a senior analyst for Northeast Asia at the International Crisis Group. And from London, Alessio Patalano, a senior lecturer at King's College in London, who focuses on Japanese defence policy and strategy. Welcome to you all. Michael, let's start with you. What did you make of what you heard there? What do you think the Prime Minister's really up to here?
Well, Mr. Taniguchi's position and mine are almost entirely in opposite camps. I think that the starting place in any democratic government has to be democracy. I understand that Mr. Abe and Mr. Taniguchi have a point of view. They feel very passionately about that point of view. They feel that they have the right about that point of view. But what they have failed to do is to convince the Japanese people that their point of view is correct. And in fact, I think that there are many, many good reasons to doubt the assumptions that go into their policies.
But hang on, they do have a democratic mandate, don't they?
Well, that's a good question. The courts of Japan have declared the electoral system here in a state of unconstitutionality, meaning that the districts, so the conservative districts in the rural areas, are overrepresented compared to the urban districts. So whether or not they have a true democratic mandate is actually something that could be questioned.
So is it possible to put a finger on how many people in Japan are opposed to what the Prime Minister is doing?
Well, the polls both across both conservative and the liberal papers are pretty consistent, that about 2 to 1 the Japanese are against this legislation at this time, and about 80% say that they don't feel the explanations coming from the government have been sufficient to make the decision right now.
And yet, if it came to an election, Mr. Abe, tomorrow, Mr. Abe would win it.
Yes, he would. And he'd win it because, first of all, the electoral system is unbalanced. Second of all, the opposition parties are divided, and they don't have many good candidates. So it isn't so much that on the issues, actually, if you go issue by issue, the polls show that the Japanese public supports the opposition's point of view. But when it comes to an actual election, the built-in advantages for the ruling party are probably insurmountable at this time.
All right, let's bring in Alessio in London. We hinted at it just there, Alessio. But this is more than about what Mr. Abe is doing with Japan's defence forces, isn't it? It's about the way that this bill has been introduced as well.
Yes, I think fundamentally the core problem, or there's two separate issues. One has to do with the content of the security bills, the other one is the method used by the government. Insofar as the content, I think Mr. Taniguchi was making a very important point, that the interpretation of the government is trying to close the gap between the security conditions that Japan faces, not just in East Asia, but as the third world economic power that has global economic interest and therefore has an interest in international security in a broader sense. So from that point of view, from a security perspective, these reforms, these legislation changes are long overdue. And if we look at the content of the bills, the changes are actually relatively minor. They are, in fact, going to allow a limited sort of a new type of missions insofar as the military is concerned. What really is important to stress from that point of view is the ability to work more effectively, more efficiently with other military counterparts, whether the United States or the context of other international actors in international peacekeeping. Different type of story, however, is the question of the method, and I think a part of the protest that we've seen across Tokyo, I was there until a couple of weeks ago. This has been going on for a while. It's really very much about the sense of the lack of popularity, and it has to be understood because the Japanese public, in a broader sense, for a very long time has been accustomed to be a security user, not a security provider in that sense. So here part of the controversy really is this sense of unease.
Of course, the Constitution was imposed upon Japan at the end of the Second World War. 75 years later, are the Japanese fond of that Constitution? Do they feel that the Constitution is being violated here, or is it more about the way in which it's being done?
I think it's really very much about the way it is done. It's not about the essence of the Constitution, because as I say, that there is the fundamental idea that war is a legitimate tool to solve international disputes. It's not going to change with these security laws. Japan is not going to become a fully fledged military power that in case of a major dispute with another country or set of countries will resort to the use of armed force to find a solution to that problem. This is not going to change, and that is the essence of the content of Article 9 of the Constitution. This is a bedrock upon which the whole sort of democratic post-1945 system has been constructed, and is very much upheld by the government. I think really what people are more upset about is really very much the way in which the Prime Minister and the administration in a broader sense has, to their eyes, failed to an extent to provide sufficient explanations as to what these changes would entail, how far this reinterpretation goes.
Okay.
And notwithstanding the details, this is still to be sort of fully verified.
All right, let me pause for just a moment and look at the exact wording of Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, drawn up, as we said, by the US in 1947 after Japan's defeat in the Second World War. It says the Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation and the threat or use of force as a means of settling international disputes. To accomplish the aim of the preceding paragraph, land, sea and air forces, as well as other war potential, will never be maintained. The right of belligerency of the state will not be recognised. Michael, this is what Shinzo Abe has been dreaming about, hasn't he, all his political life? He wants to change the constitution.
Yes, I mean, that's you hit the nail on the head. We're talking about somebody who has entered politics probably from a very young age with this dream in his mind from the beginning. So the fact that we're here at this time now in this situation shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who's been paying attention to what Shinzo Abe has been saying or doing since he was a young man.
His grandfather felt much the same way. Just explain what it is that they feel about the Japanese constitution.
Well, in short, they feel that it was a humiliation imposed on the Japanese nation. They do not accept the idea that Japan engaged in war crimes. They feel that Japan basically behaved in World War II like any other great power would have behaved in the same situation, and they feel that they want to address history and to bring back the honor of Japan.
Okay, let's bring in Yanmei Shi then in Beijing. What does China think about what's going on at the moment within Japan and its modifying or reinterpreting the constitution?
Interestingly, so far, the Chinese official response has been relatively calm and restrained by Chinese standards. So, of course, it questioned Japan's intention and warned Japan not to stray away from its pacifist path, but has avoided using some of the more emotive language, which was pretty common a couple of years ago, referenced in Japan. I think there are several factors in play. One, China had begun to sort of process and absorb the changes a year ago when the Japanese cabinet approved the proposal. And two, China has also begun to realize that, yes, there's a large opposition in Japan, that the Japanese pacifist public has been very opposed to these measures. And so if China comes out being very harsh and being seen as putting pressure on Japan, Beijing would be helping Abe and his supporters advance their security agenda, would be nudging the Japanese public towards in favoring of more robust defense. So China would not be doing itself any favor of that.
All right, so
by criticizing Japan harshly.
So there's method perhaps in their nuanced response at the moment, but they must be worried about the future and how this move could affect the regional strategic balance.
There's no doubt. So first of all, any defense measures have multiple impact, right? Of course, it will antagonize rivals and opponents, but it also can enhance deterrence, as well as ensuring allies and friends. So here in China, Beijing is not happy about it. The strategic competition and strategic mistrust between China and Japan, the two most powerful nations in Asia, have deepened and are going to continue to deepen. And South Korea is not happy seeing this, but probably Southeast Asian countries are happy to see a stronger Japan, more capable of counterbalancing China. So we've already seen the region becoming more militarized, and Japan's loosening the constitutional constraints is just one piece of it. Sort of at the center is the question of the rise of China. I wouldn't say China is a threat, but China's rise poses some uncertainty in the region, and the country has not doing a great job allaying some of the anxiety and fear about Beijing's long-term intention, and some of its recent behavior in these maritime disputes deepened regional countries' doubts about Beijing's ultimate desire and purpose. And so, including Japan, a lot of regional countries are doing.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but time is tight. I just want to nail down what it is you're saying here. As you said, the region has seen much more militarization over the years, but you don't necessarily think that that's going to lead to greater insecurity.
I mean, overall militarized region has putting a strain on the regional peace and stability, and then also just between the countries, the trust has been thinning, and suspicion has heightened. But I don't see at any moment there's going to be any war breaking out deliberately. But because of the mistrust and because of the over-militarized region, no one can rule out of any miscalculation and misunderstanding.
Alessandro, it is because of China that Shinzo Abe is doing this, isn't it?
Certainly, that is a major component of the timing of the security reform. As I said at the beginning, this is a reaction to about 10, 15 years of massive changes in the security circumstances, not only in Japan in the international context. Mr. Taniguchi mentioned the mission to Iraq in 2004, but in 2001 already there were destroyers deployed in the Indian Ocean in support of the operations on the war on terror. And over the past few years, we've seen an increased number of tensions closely home, both in the East and the South China Sea. So the security environment is becoming more tense, and is requiring a degree of response from a country that has a sizable military and has used it only in a very minimalist fashion until now. So in this respect, within this context, that's where China fits in. As a regional country, as the largest and fastest growing military power in the region, that presents a set of concerns, mostly because the behavior of China within the regional context has been far from clear in terms of what the implications of this military rise are all about. And Shinzo Abe is coming as a response to this kind of transformation.
Michael, this reinterpreting of the Constitution will make it much easier to deploy Japanese forces for various missions. Most of them are going to be peacekeeping missions, US-sanctioned peacekeeping missions. I can imagine most people in Japanese would be pretty happy with that. So why the fuss?
Well, first of all, I agree with your premise. Not US-sanctioned, more formally UN-sanctioned, although, of course, the US has a lot to do with that. Yes, I imagine that most of the deployments of the self-defense forces overseas will be peaceful and non-controversial. And in fact, that's part of the strategy. It's to get the Japanese people more comfortable with the idea of sending troops abroad. This has been what's been going on since around the early 1990s. The concern is that if you look at what happened in the debate here, the legislation says that if Japan is facing an existential threat, then it can deploy its forces into some kind of even a preemptive attack. Now, what is an existential threat? The government absolutely refuses to give any really clear idea what that is. They simply say that, well, when the time comes, we'll make a comprehensive judgment. And people don't find that to be a very, how should I say, reassuring answer.
Yan-Mei, do you think that what's going on in Japan at the moment will lead to a more peaceful region or a more tense, unstable region?
I think the immediate effect is really hard to say. Again, I think from the Chinese point of view, which is the biggest factor in this whole puzzle, it has begun to process and absorb the effect since a year ago. And also around that time, China has decided to take a more moderate and softer approach towards Japan, because China realized a singularly hardline policy towards Japan would help Abe win public support for his security agenda. So we've seen China actually opening the door for diplomacy and engagement with Japan. There have been more exchanges at all levels, and there have been 2 summit meetings with Japan in the last year, and another summit is being discussed, and there have been more exchanges across the levels. On the other hand, the reality is there also has been more strategic competition and strategic mistrust on the security and military front. So it's really hard to say whether either or. in terms of the effect of this.
OK. And there, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it. Many thanks to you all for being with us. Michael Penn in Tokyo, Yanmei Shi in Beijing, and Alessio Patalano in London. And also thanks to Tomohiko Taniguchi, who joined us a little earlier from Tokyo. Thanks to you for watching. As always, we welcome your thoughts on our discussion. You can get in touch through our programme page at aljazeera.com. Post your comments on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or you can tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finnegan in Doha, and the whole team, many thanks indeed for watching. I'll see you again. Bye for now.